Welcome and greetings to all. I am Shen Long Pen Dragon, the Lore Master. As always, a quick disclaimer, I don't own any of the images or the story in this video. The credit for these all belong to their original sources. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a brand new series today, which is The Great Battles. This is a series I've been wanting to do for a while, and I've just decided this weekend that it would be a good time to start on it. If this is your first time joining us, then welcome. Thank you very much for joining the community here, and if you're a returning viewer, then thank you for coming back. Hopefully you'll enjoy this new series. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let us actually move on to the first battle I will be going through. And of course, as you can see from the title, our very first battle that I will be going through is the Battle of Agincourt, fought between the Kingdom of England and the Kingdom of France. This took place during the 100 Years' War, and as we all probably know from our history, this resulted in an English victory. However, very few people actually really know the great details of the battle itself, and really just know that it was a victory for England. So hopefully today I will be able to walk through the battle with you, and we will see exactly what happened. So as I've already said, the powers that took part in this battle was the Kingdom of England, donated by this flag right here. This was the standard adopted by King Henry V of England, who led the English forces, and in fact he actually led the English forces personally to the battlefield. On the opposing side was the Kingdom of France, who was led by Charles VI of France, who some of you may know by his less than flattering nom de guerre, the Mad King. Exactly how true this nom de guerre was to him, I'm afraid I do not know, because I know very little about Charles VI of France. But if you would like a video about why he got this nom de guerre, let me know in the comments, and I will do my best to put together a video about that for you. So let's now have a look at the English forces, whom, as I already said, were led by Henry V. His vanguard was led by the Duke of York, with his main force being controlled by Henry himself. Lord Camoist and Sir Thomas Effingham conducted most of the rearguard and archers for the battle. The actual troop numbers themselves are said to be around 1,500 men-at-arms, which were a type of foot soldier, and 7,000 longbowmen. Now, as we probably know from our history books, the English longbow was said at the time to be the best in Europe, with few nations able to boast the same success with archers as England could. So let's now go into the French forces. As I've already said, the French king at the time was King Charles VI, also known as the Mad King. However, he himself was not at the Battle of Agincourt. He played no major role in the battle himself, and in fact he delegated command to one of his generals. So the commander of the French forces in the field was Constable Charles d'Albret, a member of the Armagnac party, and I will come into play as to why this was important later. The Constable had organised the French forces into three battle lines. The first of these, led by himself, Marshal Bonnet-Alou, along with the Dukes of Orleans and Bourbon, with his flanks protected by cavalry, led by the Count of Verdun and Sir Clinette de Brabant. I do apologise for any horrible French pronunciation that you're hearing or that you're about to hear in a few minutes. My French is absolutely abysmal. If you know the correct pronunciation for any of these names, then do feel free to comment in the comment section below. So the second line was primarily commanded by the Dukes of Bar and Alencon, with the Count of Nervez. The third line was primarily commanded by the Counts of Dalmatin and Fauconbreg. Again, I know that last one was horribly pronounced, I do apologise. The actual French troops that were deployed is heavily debated in terms of number, as most of them were locally drafted peasantry soldiers. with several local knights forming the main battle force. More French soldiers did join as the army marched, mostly peasants who had been drafted from the surrounding countryside and local lords who had led their troops to join the French. And in fact, part of the delay, which you'll see later for the battle, was because the French were awaiting more of their lords to actually join them. In any case, the actual numbers of France that they deployed could have been as few as 20,000, or they could have been as many as 50,000. The exact numbers are highly debated, but it is worth noting that not all of these were soldiers. Many of them were non-combat personnel, such as cooking staff, medical staff, and servants for the lords. So this map here is showing the march that Henry V took from England, and eventually where the Battle of Agincourt broke out, before he finally arrived at Calais. The dates here show you the different components of where he marched to and where skirmishes and battles took place. So I will go into what this map is talking about in just a few minutes. The terrain for the Battle of Agincourt itself was said to be recently ploughed farmland, which was hemmed in by very dense woodblocks. Now you'll see that this later on, this gave the English a massive advantage over the French. So let's now actually look into the build-up to the battle. After several failed negotiation attempts, England eventually invaded France on the 13th of August 1415. Henry's initial forces were said to number around 12,000 men with 20,000 horse. When I say 20,000 horse, I don't mean there was actually 20,000 cavalrymen, I just mean there were 20,000 horses in total. Upon arriving in France, his army besieged the port of Harfleur, and the town eventually surrendered on the 22nd of September. Although awaiting French reinforcement, the town was never relieved because the French, although intending to send troops in aid, were unable to do so because the army was still mustering and not ready yet to march. So, uninterrupted by the French forces in the field, Henry then eventually marched his army out of the town on the 8th of October. He took 9,000 soldiers with him, leaving the rest to guard the newly captured port, intending to go through Normandy towards Calais. Although still not quite ready for battle, the French forces gave chase and eventually prevented Henry from advancing further north, stopping him at a crossing in the Somme River. Henry forced his soldiers further south and eventually found a crossing and was able to continue north. Eventually, both sides tiring, they decided to stop, and the French tried to engage the English in peace talks once again on the 24th of October. Knowing that the French were simply just trying a delaying tactic to allow more of their lords to arrive to ensure an even larger force, Henry ordered an advance, and battle was given. So having the second negotiation attempts failed, the French prepared themselves for battle as they saw the English marching. Henry had known that the French tactic was to delay him to allow their numbers to grow even further, despite already massively outnumbering his own forces. Henry could see that his soldiers, after marching for more than 260 miles in 2.5 weeks, were exhausted. They were tired, food was running short, and they were even showing signs of potential illness spreading through the ranks. Knowing that if he didn't do something quickly, he would have a strike and potentially even a mutiny on his hands, Henry felt he had no option but to give battle and ordered the advance forward. So let's now discuss the battle itself. Leaving his originally chosen battleground, Henry advanced further north. The French, still waiting for their reinforcements, didn't take advantage of the now weakened defensive position of the English. Many historians agree that if the French had chosen this moment to charge with their cavalry, the English would have been absolutely decimated with nothing they could do, and the French would have had a resounding victory. However, the French did not attack, still awaiting their reinforcements. So uninterrupted, Henry moved his soldiers further north and set up a new defensive position. By the time the French were actually willing to fight, the English were already bombarding them with a hail of arrows. So, unwilling to stand there and let the English continue bombarding them with arrows, the French decided to deploy their cavalry for the initial attack. They felt this was a strong and robust strategy, as the open ground would allow for a good charge, and the cavalry of France was said to be among the best in Europe at the time. However, what the French didn't take into account was that the boggy, recently ploughed ground was absolutely treacherous for both man and horse. They also failed to take into account the skill, accuracy and firing speed of the English archers, which again were said to be the best in Europe at the time. It's also worth noticing that when the French cavalry actually deployed, they were understrengthed, as many of their men were said to be off tending to their horses. So with what troops they did have, it's not really surprising that when the French actually gave battle, their initial cavalry charge were absolutely decimated. It was a horrible affair. Without even reaching the English lines properly, having been hemmed in by the woodblocks, unable to outflank them, and unable to break past the sharpened wooden stakes the English archers had set up as a defence barrier, the cavalry found themselves completely overwhelmed by the bombardment and were forced to retreat through their own lines. This damaged the advancing French infantry and spread discontent and demoralised many of the soldiers. The French cavalry took no further part in the battle, as they were roundly beaten and unwilling to continue fighting. The main French assault consisted of their infantry advancing. The first battle line advanced through the mud toward the English forces. Although initially taking few losses from the English archers, it was said that they were pounded by over 1,000 arrow shafts. Their casualties started to increase when they reached the churned up mud, which the cavalry had tried to run through. Their weapons and armour now clogged with mud, and tiring from the constant bombardment of the English arrows, the French continued their advance and were able to push the English lines back somewhat. However, they were unable to break the English lines, and they took heavy casualties, gaining, in all retrospect, what was probably only about 20 meters or so. So, as the fighting continued, the French tried to reinforce the first battle line with their second battle line. This resulted in a massive press of bodies. The English archers, who were starting to run out of ammo, then decided to charge in with melee weapons, resulting in very heavy casualties on the French side. For, as you can imagine, they're getting pushed forward by their own troops, and their front troops are exhausted, trying to fight off the English, while completely and utterly clogged with mud and unable to properly defend themselves. This actually resulted in what was said many French soldiers suffocating their own armour just because of the massive press, with the front soldiers wanting to retreat to regroup and then attack later after resting, and the second battle line wanting to push forward into the assault. Eventually, the French were forced to retire, but not before something quite interesting happened. This interesting thing was that Henry V himself actually charged into the battle. And when I say charged into the battle, I quite literally mean he was on the front lines fighting hand to hand with his honour guard. The reason for this is that Henry had heard that his youngest brother, the Duke of Gloucester, Humphrey, had been injured. Unwilling to let his brother die, Henry led his household guard into the fray, and it was said that the king himself actually stood over his brother, defending him until he was eventually pulled to safety. As you can imagine, seeing their king fighting on the front lines with them greatly increased the morale of the English soldiers, and they fought even more tenaciously to protect both their king and their duke. This eventually led to the French being forced to retreat for now. So at some point during the battle, the French launched a small but very successful raid on the English baggage train. Exactly when this raid occurred, it's not really clear. But what it is known is that although small, and although it played no real significant role within the battle, it was one of the French's only successes at this day. During the raid, they were actually able to steal several items. Quite a few of them were actually treasures, including a crown that belonged to the king himself. The final phase of the battle that took place at Agincourt is probably the least pleasant of all. This was where Henry, having fought off the French and knowing that his soldiers were now tiring fast, running low on ammunition, and really not able to hold off a second French attack, had to make a very hard decision, especially since he could see that the French were preparing for another attack themselves. Taking a look around, he saw that the number of French captives that they had actually outnumbered his own frontline soldiers. This was dangerous for several reasons. One, they couldn't exactly take these prisoners with them, especially when they were low on food themselves. And two, if these prisoners decided it would be a good idea to actually try to fight the English as they were, then it could actually result in a potential recovery for the French and actually leading to them winning the day. Unable to let the French win, and hardly exactly wanting to fight both captives and a second attack from the French soldiers, Henry ordered that his soldiers were to execute all the prisoners except those of the highest noble rank, which he would use for ransom. It's worth noting that the English knights that were present and still alive at the day were unwilling to participate in the slaughter of the captives. They saw it as unchivalrous and beneath their dignity to do so, and it was also pretty demanding work trying to actually kill that many soldiers in a very short space of time, so it was mostly tasked down to the archers and peasant soldiers. Seeing that their own people were starting to get slaughtered by the English, the French became so demoralized that they actually withdrew from the field of battle, resulting in a decisive English victory. Seeing that the French were withdrawing, Henry ordered that the slaughter of the captives was to stop. Exactly how many captives were slaughtered, it's not sure. It could have been fewer than 100, and it could have been potentially several thousand. It's not known exactly how many captives were killed that day. After securing the route to Calais, Henry continued marching north and eventually returned to England, where he was welcomed home as a hero. The French, however, had a very difficult and very different aftermath after the battle. So the French, having already lost the battle, were now looking for someone to blame, and the blame fell upon the Armagnac party. Their primary and bitter rivals, the Burgundian faction, then took advantage of this to shatter the very fragile truce between them. This resulted in a small and minor but very important civil war within France, where the Burgundian forces, after 10 days of marshalling their troops, were able to march on Paris and actually seize the city. This paved the way for a renewed campaign from the English. Henry took advantage of the political situation in France to attack himself. This renewed campaign took 18 months later, after having been fully prepared for it. The English saw, from what I gather, a rounding success in northern France, primarily in the area around Normandy. As we know, the 100 Years' War did continue for some time after this, and I will actually go on to the final battle of this war at some point during this series. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the Battle of Agincourt. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening. I do hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, then please remember to like and subscribe for more lore, myths, legends, and stories. I'm glad I finally got the opportunity to make a start in this series. It's one I've wanted to do for quite a long time, and hopefully you enjoyed the video as much as I enjoyed actually making it. I will be covering battles that extend from the ancient time period all the way up to the end of World War II, so if any of those interest you, then please do let me know in the comments section below. Also, if there's a mythology video you would like me to do, like a mythology story, do let me know and I will try to get around to that at some point soon. If you are a new viewer to the channel, then welcome. I'm glad you took the time to come and join us. If you're a previous viewer or if you've been with us for a while, thank you very much for returning. It's always great to have you. Hopefully you all enjoyed this video, and let me know the kind of content you would like in the future. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I think I've prattled on long enough. I am Shenlong Pendragon, and until next time, knowledge is power.